and welcome to a quick tutorial about making tiny tassels using forks. This is for the Oh Gnome You Didn't hat, which has 3 tall narrow spikes and a jester hat, but obviously you could use this tutorial for anything you want tiny tassels, whether it's a dollhouse or earrings or whatever. So to make the tassel, you're going to need yarn or embroidery thread, a fork, a yarn needle, not a sample, and scissors. So let's get that sample out of there and talk about how we're going to do this. So tassels are made by winding something around something else and then securing it. So before we start, I'm gonna cut 2 small lengths of yarn. The first one is going to be about 10 centimeters or 4 inches, and the second one's going to be about 6 inches or 15 centimeters, just to give us a bit longer for the one that's going to hang it. So this one will make the belt, and this one is going to be the hanger. So we're just going to set those aside now. To start with, we're going to be winding our yarn around the fork. So I am going to need to secure it. So I'm just going to use my thumb to hold it, and I'm going to wrap it 10 times around. Now, one of the things that's really important is that you don't pull it. If you pull it, when it is cut, it will spring back. So something that was this long will actually be this long, and your tassel will be about half the size you want it to be. So when you're doing it, just let the yarn pass through. You're just sort of guiding it. Like you could even just have the yarn sort of passing through. You're not pinching it in any way. It usually helps to have pulled out the yarn first, nice and loose, so that you're not kind of pulling it directly from a ball or something where the tightness of the pull adds to the stress of that. So I found that 10 works nicely for this little shape. All right, we have 10 wraps, and all I'm going to do is just cut this. I'm going to cut it a little bit longer than I think I need it, because it's always easier to trim up afterwards. All right, so we now have 10 wraps on our fork. Grab the shorter of the 2 lengths and thread it on a yarn needle. The way I find this easiest is to just fold it over, pinch that little folded bit, and push it up through your yarn needle, and then pull it through. What we need to do now is kind of create the belt. A tassel has got an area sort of around the center, and then a hanger sort of from the top. So what we need to do is we need to get that belt going. So the nice thing about the fork is it's got places to pass through. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass the yarn needle right through the fork tines. And I am going to stop and hold this. Then we can bring it around, and the nice thing about having this open is we don't actually have to thread it through again, we just have to bring it around. Then thread it through a second time, and bring it around. So now we've gone around twice with our belt. Then we're going to kind of pull it nice and snug, and without popping it off the end of the fork, we are going to tie it in an overhand knot twice. So I'm going to do 1, and then I'm going to make sure it's nice and tight. And then with that, holding it nice and tight, then I'll come back for that second knot. All right, so now we're just going to let this hang down, and I'm going to snip those. Again, I'm going to snip them a bit long. See how this one here is waving like an octopus? Hey there. Hey, I'm a little octopus buddy. We'll deal with that in a little bit. I'm just going to kind of get it stuck down so that we don't have to worry about it for the moment. All right, so now we need to get the hanger. So take the longer piece of yarn and get it onto the yarn needle again. And now what we're going to be doing is we need to go through the loops that are on this tine. So just slip your needle underneath, making sure you grab every one of those loops. Pull through, take the yarn off the yarn needle, and again we're going to tie 2 knots, but this time we don't want them to be really snug. So first I'm going to make sure that my 2 ends are roughly the same height, and then I am going, or not the same height, but the same length, so that it's roughly in the middle of the tassel. All right, then I'm going to tie 2 knots, but what I am not going to do is snug this one all the way down. So I'm just going to go like about that to start. And I'm going to tie the second knot, and I want them to be tight to each other, but not to be changing the shape of the tassel head. All right, so we want to leave that nice and full and plump. We've made this one tight to make this full and plump, but we don't want to now squash it. So now we have our hanger, And we have our belt. So let's pull this off. And we have this little octopus, one that wants to go off on its own. That doesn't happen every time, but it does happen. So what I like to do when I'm doing that, the problem with them is they're so short that if you weave it onto or put it on your yarn needle, the second you try to turn around and insert it in, it's going to pop off. So let me move the fork. What I do is I put my yarn needle under and through that little belt, bring the needle way down like this, so that that one end that wants to stand up and wave is easy to just thread through the yarn needle. And once it's through, all I have to do is keep pulling, and it's going to pull it down behind that belt and make it behave so much better. All right, so now we have a tassel, but we need to cut the ends. So we've got it looped, so right in the middle of those loops we want to cut and cut. Now you remember I left some of those ends a bit long, so we'll do a little bit of trimming, and you can tidy it up a bit. If you find your tassel isn't lying exactly the way you want, you can hit it with a bit of steam from an iron or get it a little bit wet and then just kind of let it dry. If you are using wool, wool really wants to be told what to do when it's wet. So you can just steam it or get it wet and it will behave so much better and line up. If you are going to be attaching it to a hat, let me show you how I approach that for the Oh Gnome You Didn't hat. So you can see I've already done one. So we have two ends and a nice narrow tip. This is the way that this works for this particular toy. Obviously, different hats for different size people will have different ways of attaching, but to a nice narrow tip like this, what I do is I take the yarn and I thread one of them through the hat from one direction to the other. I take the other half of the tie and I thread it back the other way. So we're kind of going across each other there. All right, so we've got one end going that way, one end going the other. Then when I tighten them up, we get a cat on the table, which is not allowed. Down you go. So when we tighten it up, we do this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie another knot. Knots in knitting are sometimes frowned upon, and definitely where you walk or where it would be noticeable, that would be a problem. But sometimes knots really are the best, especially for toys where you want to make sure that things stay put no matter how roughly they're played with. So I'm just going to tie 2 knots. I'm going to thread both ends on at the same time. So I'm folding and pinching again. All I'm going to do is take the needle and insert it into the long, thin spike of this. And I'm going to let it come out roughly most of the way down. Okay, get that pulled in nicely. And then all I do, because this is a toy, I don't need to worry about sewing in the ends, so I pull them out this way. I pull them a bit snug, trim them right at the edge, and then because of that snugness, they pop right back down in. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye-bye.